Chapter 6. My Marriage, 1995-2004.
When I was leaving for England for the first time at the age of 18, my mother's last words to me were, "Don't bring back an English wife." She believed it would be impossible for a Western girl to adjust to our religion and culture. However, the decisions in my life have rarely been made through rationality and logic, more by impulse, to chase my dreams and my desires and passions. In both marriage and my post-cricket career, I made somewhat unconventional choices for somebody of my background. Combining the outcome of those two decisions was to prove more difficult still. If marriage made me realize the happiness that comes from fatherhood and family life, politics taught me the price of taking on the status quo in Pakistan. This establishment is so venal that, unable to wield the usual weapon of corruption charges against me, they instead attacked me through my personal life, most particularly my wife. The thing to understand about Pakistani politics is that many politicians have so much to lose they will stop at nothing to gain or hold on to power. In terms of quality of life, political success is of no benefit to me, but for the likes of Zardari and Sharif, losing power might mean losing everything: their wealth, their homes, their status, their privileges, and potentially their liberty, since many of them deserve to be in jail. Jemima and I were to discover how vicious this political mafia could be. It was many years after my mother's warning before I even started to contemplate marriage. At a certain point, my deepening spiritual belief made me realize that I could not reconcile the life I had been leading as a bachelor with Islam. This was the most difficult part. Everything else, fasting, praying, giving zakat, was relatively easy. The reason it was so difficult was because I had lost faith in the institution of marriage. Growing up in Zaman Park, the first used to think getting married was the most natural thing in the world and assumed that, like my sisters and cousins, I would one day have an arranged marriage. But the older I grew, the more disillusioned I became. Most of the cricketers who played with me in English county cricket and on the Pakistani team found it difficult to make a success of their married lives. For most of them it seemed like a burden. Quite a few of them found the temptations that existed in the life of an international sportsman irresistible. Besides, most married men used to look at my life with envy. So it was hardly surprising that I was disillusioned. The only marriages I saw working were those of my sisters and cousins from my large extended family. 3 of my 4 sisters were married and all had arranged marriages from within the large extended family. This was always the case with Pashtun tribes that had settled in Punjab or other parts of India. All 3 to varying degrees had their ups and downs with their husbands, especially in the early days when readjustment naturally takes place. Couples in arranged marriages face the same problems as those who have chosen their own partners, although expectations in arranged marriages tend to be somewhat lower. The crucial difference is that since it is a coming together of families, separation becomes difficult and divorce rare. The respective families, mainly the parents, act as marriage counselors during the bad times. It is considered a good deed in Islam if someone can help a couple to sort out their troubled marriage. In Pakistan, most marriages are arranged. Parents choosing a husband for their daughter will look at the candidate's financial stability, his family's reputation, and compatibility in terms of personality. In most cases, a son or daughter can decline their parents' suggestions, but it varies from region to region and class to class. In the north and northwest of Pakistan, young people are not given a lot of choice, especially girls, whilst the children of the urban elite play a bigger role in choosing their own partners. In villages, girls and boys grow up together and often know each other, so most of the matches are easy for parents to arrange. Problems arise when there is no eligible boy or girl in the village. Then a spouse will be found from further afield, and it is quite possible that the couple will meet for the first time on their wedding day. Traditional families will most likely know a groom's entire background. Parents would not allow their daughters to marry someone who could not be pressurized through his family to keep the marriage going during rough patches. Marriage not only knits families together, but the entire social life revolves around the extended family structure. The more powerful the family is, the harder it is to divorce a person belonging to that family. Some of the worst problems in arranged marriages arise where parents marry their children off to a certain family because of their financial status, regardless of whether the couple is compatible or not. Whatever the problems, the underlying idea behind arranged marriage is that sacrifices must be made for the sake of the children. Over the years I have seen a lot of unhappy arranged marriages where couples have stuck it out for the sake of their offspring in their respective families. Women, who can be more vulnerable in our society, sometimes put up with mistreatment from their husbands just for the security of their children. However, there are of course lots of cases of men having to put up with difficult marriages too. Mia Bashir looked after his wife, who had fits of madness, for 14 years. Doctors advised him to put her in an asylum, but given the state of our mental health institutions he could not bear to do so. When she had her fits, she could be violent and his face bore the scars of that violence. Whatever the ups and downs of their marriages, I could see that my sisters took great joy in their children. There was a time when they and their families lived with my father and me. Instead of being an imposition, it was wonderful, especially for my father. All their children grew up like one family in the same house, and the three sisters treated all of them as if they were their own offspring. It was this that began to change my mind about marriage. I used to notice how their husbands would literally rush back home to be with their children. Even I began to spend more time at home so I could play with them. When any of my nephews and nieces did well at school, all of us, including the other children, considered it a family triumph. When two of my sisters moved into their own homes, the house felt empty. Fortunately, they only moved a few hundred yards away, and most evenings their children would still come round. Making the decision to get married was one thing, but finding a Pakistani wife was another. I had already passed my mid-30s, but most eligible girls were married off in their early 20s. In Pakistan, unmarried girls often live quite a sheltered existence. A woman under 25 would be too young for me, with too little experience of life. I also had to bear in mind that my extended family was quite conservative about the way to go about finding a wife. I had to make a choice after meeting the girl and her parents over a couple of brief meetings. Usually what happens is that the mothers, along with the sisters, survey their social scene and, after a careful process of elimination, pick a few eligible candidates. Then during marriage festivities amongst the community, the potential spouses pointed out. If the boy and girl in question are both interested, then more intimate meetings, like a tea appointment, are organized. As for most Pakistani families, our weddings were segregated. It was too awkward for me, in my position and at my age, to go to the women's section to look at eligible girls. This would have been quite acceptable if I were in my mid-20s, but in my mid-30s it was a terrifying prospect. At one point my father got fed up, like the rest of my family, and decided to take matters into his own hands. He arranged tea at a friend's house so that I could meet his friend's daughter. I tried everything to get out of it, but in the end, out of respect for my father and not wanting to embarrass him with a last-minute cancellation, I went along. The whole situation was horribly awkward for all concerned. When the girl came into the room, I was so embarrassed I could not even look at her. Meanwhile, her mother treated me as if I was a 25-year-old, rather than someone who was approaching middle age. I was even asked about my university days, again a question more apt for someone in their early to mid-20s. The agony finally ended when my father and I begged to leave. On the way back he did not even bother to ask me what I thought of the girl. He realized how ridiculous the whole situation was. All he said was that since my mother had passed away he had simply tried to do his duty. We both laughed and I politely requested him not to make any more attempts to find me a bride. I was still so busy playing cricket during this period that I was never in Lahore long enough to make a concerted attempt to find a wife. However, once I retired I made more of an effort. The girls I tended to meet were the westernized ones, but I could not see them fitting into my conservative family. My sisters had strong characters and were not likely to be very tolerant of someone who flaunted family tradition. The last thing I wanted was that my marriage should isolate me from my family. As for the ones who would have been compatible with my background, educated girls from conservative families, it was too much of a lottery. How could I at my age marry someone after a few conversations? The idea of going to more tea appointments like the one I had been to with my father simply terrified me. In the end I had to accept the fact that I was too old for an arranged marriage. I was still intent on marrying a Pakistani girl when by chance I met Jemima in London at a dinner organized by my Persian friend Sharia. I immediately found her attractive and intelligent and was particularly impressed by her strong value system and the fact that despite her young age she already had a spiritual curiosity. While I had previously met Jemima's siblings and cousins, I did not meet her parents till just before we got married. I had worried that it would be impossible to convince them, not only because of our age difference but also because of Jemima having to live in Pakistan. I was amazed at how firmly both Lady Annabel and Jimmy Goldsmith stood behind Jemima's decision. Of course there were warnings about the problems of a cross-cultural marriage, but neither was at all against Jemima's conversion to Islam. I was amazed at their tolerance, especially given the prejudice against Islam in the West. When the news of our marriage broke in mid-May 1995, the media in both Pakistan and the UK went berserk, particularly over Jemima's conversion. There was no shortage of advice for her in the English media about how dreadful life would be in Pakistan. The tabloids' prejudices about Islam and Pakistan were fully apparent. Jemima was told she would not be allowed to drive a car and would be veiled from head to toe. The only positive aspect of this perplexing media coverage was that outraged Muslims put forward the Islamic point of view, something that was not often visible in the Western media. The gist of the advice given to her in the UK was that she was too young and innocent to realize that she was being lured away by an older man because of her wealth to a country where women were enslaved. I was not surprised that my motive for marriage was thought to be her money. That very accusation was put to Jinnah when he married his bride, 24 years younger than himself and a Parsi convert to Islam. After all, people with a materialistic mindset would think that. I felt this was extremely unfair to Jemima and failed to do justice to her intelligence and her attractive personality. It took great strength of character to cope with such unfriendly media exposure, all the more so because until then she had been almost entirely protected from this kind of intrusion. It was really tough on her and she coped most admirably. Though I did help Jemima by recommending books on Islam, I never tried to force my views on her. I remembered how hard my mother had tried to make me a practicing Muslim. Despite my great love for her, she had failed to convince me. It had been Mia Bashir who won me over with his gentle way of never asking me to do anything and allowing me to discover the truth myself. In Pakistan, Jemima received a warm and gracious welcome. As long as they adapt their behavior to local customs, foreigners have always been received with great hospitality in Pakistan. It is only since 9/11 and the Seer drone attacks in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa that antagonism towards Americans, and inevitably other Westerners, has crept in. There was an initial frostiness amongst certain sections of the westernized elite, but once they got to know Jemima they were friendly. This wariness would have been because Jemima, as a Westerner, made some of them feel insecure because their sense of superiority in Pakistan stemmed from their considering themselves to be westernized. However, what was hardest for Jemima were the politically inspired media attacks on her. Even though I was not yet in politics, I was already regarded as a threat by the politicians because of great public appreciation for the cancer hospital. The government-sponsored media portrayed my marriage as an intricate plot by the Zionists to take over Pakistan through Jemima. It did not seem to matter that she was not actually Jewish. In fact, she was baptized and confirmed as a Protestant. Her father, Jimmy Goldsmith's father, was Jewish and his mother was a French Catholic, but he grew up in an atheist household. This campaign intensified when I announced my political party a year after our marriage. When I married Jemima, I had no intention of setting up my own political party. The country's rapid decline was alarming me, though, and I was already mulling over the idea of getting involved with some kind of political movement. I had been hoping that certain people I knew would form a political party I could support, but in the end they had neither the financial means nor the nationwide support to challenge the two established parties, the PPP, Pakistan People's Party, and the PML, Pakistan Muslim League. So that option was not available to me. I had also explored the possibility of supporting one of the religious parties. I had assumed that their people must have the same understanding of faith that I did. Sadly, I gradually realized that while some of the members of these parties had genuine faith, plenty of others had only a superficial understanding of Islam. Most of them were only using religion, as others used the ethnic or regional card, as a vehicle to get into power. They turned out to be just as corrupt as other politicians too. The more my understanding of political parties and specifically the religious parties deepened, the more I realized that faith without wisdom and knowledge could produce bigots completely lacking in compassion and tolerance. No wonder the Prophet, Pbuh, considered the ink of a scholar to be holier than the blood of a martyr. No wonder either that the public usually rejects the religious parties at the polls. At no point in time have they garnered more than 19% of the seats in the National Assembly, and their share of the vote is lower still. Hence the apparent paradox to the outsider, that while people in Pakistan will sacrifice their lives for Islam, they don't want religious parties running the country. When the dust had settled after the furore over my marriage, I again started meeting politically minded people and having endless discussions about how to put up a challenge to the political mafia in Pakistan. I say mafia, because democracy is just a cover for the two parties that take turns in plundering our country. I was appalled at how the ruling class had squandered Pakistan's talent and resources. There seemed to be no limit to their greed. At the same time, I was struck by the generosity and fortitude of the Pakistani people that I had seen because of my work with the hospital, and the raw talent and resourcefulness of the Pakistani overseas community. So many of them, when given a level playing field, had succeeded in their chosen spheres. What, I asked, could Pakistan achieve if we had a system that actually rewarded rather than discouraged merit? I came to the conclusion that the only way to change the system was to enter politics myself. However, whenever I thought about forming my own political party, I could not work out how I would finance it. The reason why politics in Pakistan had been concentrated within a few families was because the vast majority of people had neither the time nor money to have the luxury of participating. True, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the 1970 elections created a movement that captured the masses' imagination so completely that he was able to defeat the established political houses with political non-entities. However, Bhutto was fortunate that money did not play as big a part in politics as it did after Zia's 1985 non-party elections. Bhutto also had three other advantages. 1. He had been a cabinet minister for 8 years in Ayub Khan's military dictatorship, so already knew the political scene from within. Secondly, there was a huge political vacuum in Pakistan after Ayub Khan because he had crushed all the political parties in West Pakistan. Thirdly, in the Cold War politics of left and right, the entire highly organized left supported Bhutto. My dilemma was how to form a party of clean people who had the time and money to work in politics. I also had another issue to think of. I was a married man now, and Jemima was trying to adjust to a completely alien environment and culture. If all my time was spent on politics and keeping the hospital going, how would I do justice to my marriage? We discussed the issue endlessly. It was clear by now that there was simply no way left but for decent Pakistanis to get involved in politics. Otherwise the country would be sunk by our politicians. Since Jinnah, the quality of our leaders had been steadily deteriorating. All over the world career politicians are disliked, but in Pakistan, as in many developing countries, they are seen as crooks, and with a great deal of justification. What amazed me was that while almost every dinner table conversation in the country condemned the politicians for destroying Pakistan's potential, no one was prepared to do anything about it. The affluent class's response to the country's downward spiral was to get Canadian passports or US green cards. They just did not have the guts or the will to give up their comfortable lives and take on the corrupt political class. In Islamabad it was quite common to see members of the elite, who denigrated the politicians in private, groveling at their feet at public functions. When I announced my party, Tehreek-e-Insaf, Movement for Justice, on the 25th of April 1996, I had lost all fear of dying. This meant I knew exactly why I was going into politics, which was to take on the political mafia in Pakistan. They had always worked on the premise that anyone who threatened them should either be bought or eliminated. The other founding members and I presented it as a broad-based movement for change whose mission is to create a free society based on justice, with an independent judiciary as its bedrock. At a news conference in Islamabad, somebody asked me about my lack of experience in politics, and I had to acknowledge that I had none. But then neither have I any experience in looting and plunder, I added. I had big ideals, but it was true that I was ill-equipped. My entry into this world was a bit like when I first saw people swimming. One summer holiday my cousins took me to the pool at Atchison College. I was 4 years old and it was the first time I had ever seen a swimming pool. I could see that people seemed to be moving around near the surface of the water, so I decided it must be quite shallow and promptly threw off my clothes and jumped straight in. I immediately sank to the bottom. After swallowing a lot of water, I was taught by my cousins to swim within a few days. Politics was a similar experience, though the learning process was much longer. I had nobody to teach me, no mentors, and made many mistakes. Neither Jemima nor I fully understood what I had got us into. Nor had we anticipated, despite all our discussions, how much strain it would put on our private lives. There was simply no time for family life. For the next month and a half I had to meet an endless stream of people, at all hours, and then I had to make frequent trips to the provinces to appoint party office bearers. We had a tremendous response, but no idea how to deal with it. My fellow founding members were as inexperienced in the political field as I was. Frankly, even if we had had some idea of what to do, we were simply not equipped to cope with it. We could not answer the mail or give proper attention to all of those who came to our Lahore office. One of the main problems I had was learning to judge people. So many people were coming to me, keen to get involved, but I could not tell if they were genuine or not. My sisters consider it one of my principal flaws that I always trust people too much. I would welcome volunteers on board only to then find out hours, weeks or sometimes months later that they were just opportunists and did not share my ideals at all. The political world was full of con men, whose only aim was to obtain power for their self-interest. It would take me almost a decade of meeting thousands and thousands of people before I could acquire the ability to distinguish between genuine and phony people within minutes. There is no shortcut to learning this skill. To make matters worse, the government-sponsored propaganda that I was part of a Jewish plot to take over Pakistan meant that we had a lot of people wanting to join us thinking they could make money out of the party. They reasoned that the Jews must have given us millions of dollars. After all, during the Cold War, socialist organizations in Pakistan received money from the Soviet embassy. So we had funny situations where people came looking for easy money, and were shocked when we asked them for donations instead. One day I found hundreds of cars parked outside my office. I had to fight through crowds of people to get into the office itself. It turned out that some local rag had written that Bill Clinton had given me the go-ahead. From that, these people had surmised that the Americans had decided to install me in power. Meanwhile, I had terrible relations with the Pakistani press. As a sportsman, I had never felt the need to court journalists. As far as I was concerned, my performance said it all. But politics was different. In this arena the media could make or break you, just like in the hospital fundraising. At the height of the chaos I had to go to England to defend myself in the libel case brought against me by Alan Lamb and Ian Botham. This stemmed from comments I had made about the issue of ball tampering back in 1994. The last thing I wanted was to waste my time with a court case, but I was left with no choice. My formidable barrister, George Carman QC, felt the chances of winning in front of an English jury were minuscule, about 10%, because Botham was a national hero. He advised me to settle out of court as the financial costs of losing were astronomical. At the start of the trial I felt fairly confident, since I knew I was innocent and that I had not made the alleged comments. But as it wore on, proceedings seemed to be going against me. I started to worry. A loss would have meant bankruptcy, and I was worried about how I would support my family if I lost. There was nothing more humiliating than the idea of living off my wife or having to borrow money. Worse still would have been the blow to my 2-month-old political party. In the middle of the case I called up Mia Bashir to ask him to pray for me. He sounded pessimistic and said, "The judge is against you." Sure enough, after the judge had done his summing up, George Carman asked the jury to leave and told the judge that for the first time in his 40-year career he had to make a complaint that the summing up was biased against his client. Despite the many stressful situations I had been in during my cricket career, the greatest tension I have ever felt was during the 6 hours or so while the jury deliberated. George Carman was already preparing me for defeat, and writing his appeal. As I was waiting, I got a message from a friend saying that Mia Bashir wanted to speak to me. I phoned him and found him in a cheerful mood. "Allah is changing the jury's mind," he said. It returned a 10-2 majority verdict in my favor. When I got home a couple of months later, the fervor over my new party had subsided. Now at least we had a period of calm and could organize ourselves. I started touring various cities and towns to gather support and form our party's organization. The calm did not last long. On the 5th of November 1996, President Farooq Leghari dissolved Benazir Bhutto's government and announced elections in 3 months' time. When I met with Leghari, he told me that Sharif and Benazir had each siphoned off $1.5 billion United States dollars from the country and pledged to hold them accountable. My party was only 6 months old by then and I had lost 2 months in the UK because of the court case. Nonetheless, we decided to participate in the election campaign. We felt it would be the perfect opportunity to organize ourselves as a national party. Plus, I felt it was an ideal way to really get the issue of corruption debated publicly in the run-up to the polls. I realized that there was no way we could make much of an impact as far as votes were concerned, as we had no organization at the grassroots level. So it was already quite clear in my mind that we would campaign all over Pakistan and then withdraw a week before the polls. When I started our campaign, everyone was amazed at the huge crowds that came to my rallies. The youth especially came to listen to me in droves, as this was the section of the population most hungry for change. When the Tehreek-e-Insaf's rallies, which were bigger than those for Sharif or Benazir, were shown on television, there was a rush of candidates keen to stand on our party ticket. We formed a board to select our prospective candidates. In our zeal to make sure that nobody who had any blemish on their character was given our party ticket, a lot of good people were lost. Anyone who had a political background was given extra vetting. Seeing the potency of my attack, Sharif started making overtures to me. First he offered me the most senior position in his party after him, then he offered my party an electoral alliance with 20 seats in the National Assembly. Everyone knew at this stage that Sharif was going to win the election simply because there was no other national party apart from Benazir's now discredited PPP. For us it was a huge compliment that a party that was just a few months old should be considered enough of a threat to be made such an offer. However, I had no hesitation in rejecting him, as I considered him just as corrupt as Benazir. An alliance with Sharif would have compromised my principles. I had only come into politics to oppose unscrupulous politicians like him, so how could I align myself with his party? While I believe we all have to make compromises in life, they should be made to attain your vision, not on the vision itself. I was also fortunate in that, unlike professional politicians, I did not need power for its perks and privileges. I was very clear about the fact that unless I could implement my agenda of reform, there was no need to be in politics, as I already had everything I could possibly desire in life. I felt it would be much better to be in the opposition and be a check on the government than be part of the power structure and have my hands tied. Joining Sharif would not only have meant I became part of the status quo, but I would have also lost all my credibility. The next development was that Benazir turned on Leghari, accusing him of being a traitor to the PPP. The ferocity of her attacks clearly rattled him and he threw his lot in with Sharif, forgetting his pledge to try him and Benazir for corruption before allowing them to contest elections. A month before the polls it became clear to everyone that Leghari's caretaker government had entered into an agreement with Sharif's PMLN, compromising what should have been a neutral administration. The entire establishment from then on began to bat for Sharif. Administrative officers chosen by him were posted in crucial positions in his political stronghold of Punjab. It is almost impossible to beat whichever party is backed by the establishment in Pakistan. Once the establishment makes its party of choice clear, the powerful district administration comes into action and the local power brokers fall into line. Everyone wants to be on the winning side, because only the winner can gain the influence over the powerful bureaucracy needed to dole out patronage to his cronies. Keen to align themselves with those looking most likely to take power, various other forces began to jostle for position: the big feudal families in the criminal world, the smugglers and the drug barons. In every district in the country there is an underworld element that controls anything from 500 to 2,000 votes. The criminal mafia has to be with the winning party as it needs its protection to operate. Even for the common man, be he bureaucrat, shopkeeper, police officer or cab driver, getting ahead in Pakistan revolves around his links with the incumbent rulers. I wrote an open letter exposing the points of the agreement between Leghari and Sharif. I decided the best thing to do next would be to pull out of the elections, as we had achieved the objectives we had set ourselves. However, by criticizing Leghari's government and calling him to account on his broken promises, I had now opened myself up to attack on a third front. A week before the polls I called a meeting of our senior party members and updated them on the situation. I told them that the maximum number of seats we might win was 3, but most likely we were not going to win any. I felt that our party was too young to take such a crushing defeat and that donations would dry up if we lost. How would we then finance the party? Moreover, we simply did not have the resources or organizational capacity to participate. In Pakistan, a political party needs to organize buses to take people to the polling stations and people to staff them, with polling agents for both men and women. It is a huge organizational and logistical undertaking. But the majority of our party hierarchy wanted to fight on. Some had allowed themselves to be convinced by the size of the crowds at our rallies that we would win a lot of seats. This made me realize how people in politics delude themselves. They always underestimate the opposition's strength and exaggerate their own. In cricket, it used to be the opposite. I had to constantly stress to my team not to overestimate the opposition's strength and be overawed. There were those in the party who felt that we would lose face if we backed out now. Another argument was that all the money spent by our candidates on elections would have been wasted. The person who swayed me in the end was Imran Khan, a senior and much respected lawyer in our party. He felt that the experience we would gain from contesting the elections would be invaluable. Having learned from our defeat, we would be well prepared next time round, which is when our real chance would come. In taking part in the elections, we took the most difficult path. It really was the charge of the Light Brigade, but without the horses and without the arms. No party, however popular, can win an election without a grassroots political organization. Our minuscule financial resources were nothing compared to those of the two main parties, both of whom had already made plenty of money from their time in power. We had major issues with media coverage too. At the time there was only one television channel and it was government-controlled. During the whole 90-day campaign, each party was only given a half-hour slot. This clearly did not give us enough airtime to mobilize and motivate people about our agenda and encourage them to get out there and vote. I had also had a problem getting my message across because of my inexperience and inability to deal with the press. I found my statements would come out completely distorted. I later discovered that there were journalists on politicians' payrolls who were experts at killing or distorting opposition statements. I came to realize that the freedom of the press was really a myth. The newspaper owners pursued their own agendas through their publications. The freedom of the press only stood as long as their interests were not threatened. In another indication of my inexperience, I made a media blunder just a few days before the elections. Jung, Pakistan's biggest circulation paper, quoted me saying that while we hoped for the best, it was possible that we might not get even one seat. Of course, no political leader should ever say that kind of thing, whether it is correct or not, because it completely demoralizes your workers. Compounding our difficulties, the media campaign against us by the PMLN had been highly effective. We were simply defenseless in the face of its onslaught. Their attack was focused entirely on my personal life. They even stooped so low as to keep calling up a female friend of mine, Sita White, and publishing lurid interviews with her. More damaging still was the conspiracy theory about a Zionist plot to take over Pakistan. They went to the extent of getting a newspaper to publish a photograph of a check for £40 million supposedly given to me by Jemima's father for my election campaign. Then statements from political and religious figures were printed saying they would not allow the Jews to take over Pakistan. After the elections, the paper involved printed a few lines on the inside pages, admitting that the check was a forgery. But the damage was done and it was too close to the elections for our struggling media office to change public perceptions. Given our various weaknesses, we had only one hope, and that was for a heavy turnout. Unfortunately, on election day the polling booths were deserted, especially in the cities. Most Pakistanis obviously felt that voting would not change their lives for the better anyway. It was clear that Sharif would win and Benazir would be wiped out, but no one had anticipated the margin of his victory. He ended up with a 2/3 majority in parliament, although everyone looked at the number of votes cast with great suspicion. The president had announced a turnout of 25% by the evening of the polls, while the BBC put it at less than 18%. By the following morning the nation was told the turnout was 38%. It was only after Sharif's government was dismissed in 1999 that a senior member of the Election Commission explained to me how the polls had been rigged. Certain constituencies were selected for manipulation. Within those constituencies, polling stations where rigging was easily possible were earmarked as red polling booths. The elections were held during Ramadan, so the moment the voting had finished at these booths, the election agents were taken to break their fast some distance away. In certain cases, reluctant polling agents were ordered to go by the army personnel guarding the election stations. They were then kept away for 45 minutes to an hour. In the meantime, a couple of members of the election commission stuffed the ballot boxes with votes for the PMLN candidate. In order to avoid detection, they cleverly raised the amount of votes of the number 2 candidate so that the gap between the winning candidate and the rest was not too glaring. There was, however, a huge gap between the top 2 candidates and everybody else. I have to say I felt sorry for Benazir. Despite having been her biggest critic, all the cards were stacked against her. With the caretaker government and all its power firmly behind Sharif, it was obvious that she did not stand a chance in hell. As expected, she was completely routed. As for Tehreek-e-Insaf, we failed to win a single seat. Following the 2008 elections, the Electoral Commission found that 37 million of the 80 million voters registered were bogus, that is, duplicated, multiple, or bogus entries. In June 2011, on my petition to the Supreme Court, the 37 million bogus votes were annulled, and the court ordered 35 million youth votes to be registered. Luckily, over my 21 years of international cricket, which had included many a drubbing, I had developed a defense mechanism to protect myself and manage the more painful aspects of failure. One of my worst memories was losing to India in India on our 1979 80th tour. We had to sneak back into Pakistan in the dead of night and unannounced, so scared were we of being humiliated by the outraged public. The customs staff confiscated almost everything they possibly could of us, searching even our pockets and keeping us at the airport for 2 hours. For days afterwards we all avoided going out in public to escape the inevitable backlash. Yet 7 years later we arrived at the same Lahore airport after beating India. We never even made it to customs. The airport staff carried us on their shoulders from the tarmac to the crowd of tens of thousands who had flooded the airport. For 5 miles from the airport into the city center there were people lining the roads cheering us. The only other time I saw such jubilation and euphoria was when we landed in Lahore after winning the World Cup in 1992. So by the end of my career I had a pretty good idea about the dynamics of victory and defeat. I had learned not to lose my head when we won and to come to terms with and deal with the bad times, when you became the object of the general public's ire and even your close friends changed towards you. The first thing to understand with failure is that there is no point in making excuses, there are no listeners. As they say, failure is an orphan, and you are alone. It is best to accept it graciously and congratulate the winner. Then you must have the ability to analyze where you went wrong. This is the hallmark of successful people, that they are their own best critic. One of the reasons I succeeded in cricket, when compared to more talented cricketers than me, was because I could analyze my weaknesses accurately. In October 1984, when I started to bowl again after a 2-year layoff following a stress fracture in my left shin, I discovered I had developed a flaw in my bowling action. For 3 months I experimented and tried everything to remove the flaw, but nothing worked. Such was my concentration that I dreamed and saw myself bowling and worked out how to remove the flaw, all in my sleep. The next morning in the nets I corrected my action. Some cricketers' careers have been finished by analyzing things wrongly, as there is a great danger that, demoralized by failure, you can actually make a wrong analysis and compound the failure. The best naturally gifted timer of the ball I ever saw was Zaheer Abbas. In 1978 he completely annihilated the touring Indian bowling attack in Pakistan. A year later, when we toured India, there was massive public expectation of him. I could see him crumbling under this weight, but rather than blocking the fear of failure, and concentrating on managing his innings, he started looking elsewhere. First he started fiddling with his technique, one which, I reminded him, had enabled him to break records less than a year ago. A few days later he had his eyes tested. Was there something wrong there? 2 weeks after that, he was in such a state that he felt someone had cast a black magic spell on him, and he ended up being dropped from the team. Over the years, I found a lot of people being defeated by failure because of their inability to analyze their mistakes properly. After the election disaster, I wanted to seek solitude, and make my own analysis of our disaster. Another part of my strategy is that it is useless reading any newspapers. Why torture yourself by reading gloating articles by critics who were just waiting for you to fail? I cut down on public engagements too, because the more people you meet, the more suggestions you receive about where you went wrong. Suggestions being free, they are never in short supply, and all they end up doing is prolonging the bitter taste of failure. So I would always hunker down and keep myself to myself while I made my own analysis and prepared my strategy for how to bounce back. After the elections, I grabbed the opportunity to have some time off and escaped to the Salt Range with my family, where we spent a blissful few days. I had hardly seen Jemima and Suleiman for the previous few months. For all the pain of the political loss, the happiness I got spending precious time with my firstborn more than compensated. In fact, this was the easiest defeat for me to accept, as I had already known that the best we could hope for was a mere 3 seats. We certainly were not ready and did not have the team to form a government and implement my vision. I felt too that these elections had at least been useful in providing us with an opportunity to put forward the issues of corruption and accountability. In addition, the campaign had helped us build up a national network. However, our loss had a devastating effect not only on my young party, but also on Jemima, my sisters and close friends. They had absolutely no idea how to handle the taunts and ridicule they faced when they went out in public or read the newspapers. Poor Jemima, as well as putting up with the whole Zionist plot story, had to see endless articles criticizing, mocking and ridiculing her husband. And I have to say I was roasted by the media. I was attacked by the right, the left and the powerful lobby of crooked politicians. The latter were particularly vindictive as I had advocated capital punishment for those whose corruption was proved beyond a certain amount. Since 1983, when I had broken my leg and had a bad year, I had had a series of successes, with both cricket and the hospital. The election defeat was the first big opportunity for those envious of that success and keen to see me fail. People love to see an icon fall, it is part of human nature. And we had been completely wiped out. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a decimation. It became clear to me that we could not beat the status quo politicians on their pitch. We could only win if we could create a movement like the 1970 Bhutto movement, where people vote for the party rather than the candidate. A few weeks after the elections, Mia Bashir dropped in to commiserate. Jemima told him that she wished I had never gone into politics. She told him how much respect there was for me in Pakistan because of my cricket, and the cancer hospital, and that now I had become a figure of ridicule and the butt of jokes, my private life raked over in the media. She told him that she had always felt in her heart that I should only have done humanitarian work and stayed out of any controversy. He listened to her with a quiet smile before responding that the object of this life was not to be popular and that those who made that their purpose were condemned to live by fickle public opinion. Then he told her the story of this highly respectable and successful businessman who was happily married and leading a contented life. At the age of 40 he was inspired by the Almighty to tell the people of his town that there was only one God. When he tried to convey this message, though, they became upset because it was against the beliefs of their forefathers, who worshipped many idols as gods. Besides, every year lots of people from all over the region visited the town to worship the idols and the townsfolk made a lot of money from these pilgrims. So their financial interests were also being threatened by the new message. When this man persisted he was subjected to all sorts of abuse and ridicule. Being honorable and sensitive, he was deeply hurt by people's attitudes. One day his uncle mocked and ridiculed him so much that he came home and cried in his wife's arms. Because his wife knew him so well, she knew he was telling the truth and totally believed in him. She stood by him and urged him on with his calling. That man was the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, and he eventually succeeded in founding one of the greatest civilizations in human history. This is just a passing phase, Mia Bashir said. Besides, if decent people do not come into politics, the country will continue to be plundered by crooked politicians and soon become unlivable in. Jemima began to relax after that, though she would insist that I organized myself better so that I gave my family its fair share of time. I began to manage my time more efficiently, but my troubles were only just beginning. The party was in severe financial difficulty. A lot of money had been wasted in the thick of the election campaign and we had incurred loans that had to be paid off. But who was going to fund a party that had suffered such a crushing loss? When I was captain, if we suffered a defeat I would avoid team meetings for a couple of days because they were counterproductive and would invariably turn into a blame game that left the team divided and demoralized. The difference was that a cricket team had to rally itself for the next match, which gave them something to look forward to. In the case of my party, the next elections were 5 years away. Who was going to face the ruthless Sharif brothers all that time? Nawaz's brother Shahbaz was also a politician, and the two of them were masters at victimizing their opponents. Just like a vanquished cricket team, my party started searching for scapegoats. Members who had urged us to contest the polls were crucified by the ones who had agreed with me that it was best to pull out. Others simply lost faith in my leadership. They had known me as someone who was successful in whatever field I entered. This political rout had shaken their confidence in me. These people did not realize that when I first played cricket I was not successful at all. In fact, I was dropped after my first test match, and it took me 5 years before I consolidated my position on the team. After my first tour, a lot of newspapers called me Imran Khan. The hospital project too had plenty of early hiccups. The general opinion amongst our educated classes had initially been that it was a non-starter, and even once it was built, some skeptics never thought we would be able to run it. Other differences between members of our party's Central Executive Committee that had been simmering for a while now came out into the open. Some of my senior party members went into depression. A few just left the party, usually the ones who had felt that allying with me would provide a shortcut to power. Then there were those who could not think of hanging around till the next polls or were scared of political victimization. It is customary for the victor in Pakistani politics to use the police and bureaucracy to victimize his opponents. For example, income tax officers can suddenly target your business, or thugs will turn up on your doorstep to beat you up. My cousin Asad Jahangir joined the police force after graduating from Oxford in 1969. He once told me about an incident after the 1977 elections when he was posted to Sindh as a young and idealistic police officer. One of the local landlords came to see him after he had been elected. After exchanging formalities, he politely requested the bewildered Asad to send a couple of policemen to his political opponent's house to give him a sound thrashing. In our feudal culture, it was almost as if it was the winner's prerogative to further humiliate the loser. The judiciary gives no protection to the opposition either, having always been subordinate to the executive. Because of this total lack of rule of law, some Pakistanis will vote for someone despite knowing he is totally crooked out of fear of retribution or the lure of patronage. Landless peasants are especially vulnerable because their landlord can threaten to turf them out of their homes or beat them up if they don't vote for him or whichever party or candidate he is supporting. Losing the elections not only made collecting money for the party difficult, but it hit the cancer hospital. Each year it had a huge deficit because of treating the majority of its patients for free. At this point it only generated 30% of its revenues, and for the rest we relied on donations. During the elections my powerful political opponents had, as well as targeting my personal life, made allegations about the hospital in the press, claiming that it was not in fact treating the poor for free and that donations were being used on my election campaign. This inevitably caused some donors to doubt us and fundraising stalled. The two most important board members of the hospital, Razak Dawood and Dr. Parvez Hassan, asked me to give up politics as they feared it would destroy the great project. They told me to be realistic and that I had no chance of succeeding in our corrupt political culture. All my life I have been told to be pragmatic. I heard this again and again during the course of my cricket career and all through the early years of the hospital. But I resolutely remain an idealist. For me, pragmatism today in Pakistan means accepting a corrupt and oppressive status quo. At times like this in my life, when things seem hopeless, I always look back to similar occasions, in cricket or in the hospital, when persistence eventually led to success. Nonetheless, even my idealism was tested in 1997, which was to prove an extremely difficult year. Aside from my political woes and the hospital funding problem, I had a personal financial crisis. The court case in England against Botham and Lamb had drained me financially, and since they had appealed against the verdict against them, I could not get my costs back. Had the case gone to appeal, there was no way I could have fought it as I had spent so much money during the elections. To top it all, Jemima's father, Jimmy Goldsmith, was dying from cancer and she was totally distraught. He passed away in July 1997, leaving his family and friends bereft. A few weeks later Princess Diana died. Her visit to the hospital earlier in the year had brought fresh donations, giving us enough breathing space for me to organize some more fundraisers and stop it going under. She had offered to attend a fundraiser in Saudi Arabia later in the year to help further. Her death capped what was the worst 12 months of my life since 1985 when I lost my mother. Looking back, The only thing that made me happy that year was watching my son Suleiman grow up. For me, nothing in my life gave me more joy than having children. Had I known how happy they would make me, I would have got married when I was younger. Aside from my faith and my family, what helped me during this period of my life were the lessons I had learned in cricket. They told me that there were no shortcuts in life. If you wanted something, you had to work for it. And that hard work was never wasted. If one had a passion for what one wanted to achieve, then hard work ceased to be drudgery. You only lose when you give up in your mind. In addition, I had learned that circumstances never remain the same, but never must one give up if one feels one is heading towards defeat. I used to find that at the start of a 5-day test match one could never predict how the 5 days would pan out, as it was dependent on so many factors. The pessimists in the team would sometimes conclude after the first day that we were going to lose and more or less accept defeat. Being an optimist, I always used to look at it differently. I found unexpected situations would suddenly give you the opportunity to make a comeback in the game. For instance, the weather would change, or the way the pitch was playing. Or the other team could just make a mistake you could capitalize on. If you hadn't already given up, you could make the most of these variables. I have kept this attitude in life. Besides, hopelessness is faithlessness. There were people within my party, as well as plenty of political commentators, who started predicting that after Sharif's heavy mandate no one would be able to dislodge him for the next decade. At this point my party was completely written off by everyone. Sharif's party itself was already planning for the next 20 years, so carried away was it by its 2/3 majority. I thought differently and was to be proved right. With my usual dogged optimism, I set about dealing with the various issues on my plate. First was the hospital. On the back of Princess Diana's visit, we had started a campaign to invite all opinion makers, journalists, columnists and newspaper editors to the hospital to visit. By the beginning of 1998, all these efforts combined to lift the hospital's finances out of danger. By 1999, donations had gone back to the pre-election level. Meanwhile, my personal financial problems started easing up too. I began to write and commentate on cricket just enough to make my contributions to the party and pay the bills. In 1999, Botham and Lamb dropped their appeal, so I did not have to think of additional funds. With better organization, I also began to have more time to enjoy family life. My greatest sacrifice for being in politics was not always being able to spend as much time as I wanted to with my family. In April 1999, the Almighty blessed us with our second son, Qasim. Politics, however, was still a problem. I had managed to settle the party's debts within the year, but raising money was almost impossible. Our office holders never had sufficient funds to do full-time politics. As the country's economic situation worsened, some of our office bearers went bankrupt, others had to work doubly hard to earn the same amount of income. A lot of my time was spent in settling disputes, usually when the workers of a particular area would refuse to acknowledge a senior office bearer because he was not giving enough time to the party. If the head of a district did not work, the whole district would become inactive. We were up against the feudal landlords and career politicians, people who had often inherited a constituency and had the infrastructure and resources to do politics full-time. I also had difficulty finding leadership for my party. This is in fact a general problem in Pakistan. During my cricketing career, I always used to wonder why there was so much intrigue within the Pakistan cricket team. I played cricket in England for several first-class teams, Oxford, Worcester and Sussex. I also played for New South Wales in the Australian Sheffield Shield competition. I never saw any intrigue against captains in first-class teams I played for in England or Australia, even though some were pretty poor. Yet in Pakistan there were always groups within the team that were ready to undermine the captain whenever they lost. I was made captain in 1982 when the team rebelled and refused to play under the incumbent skipper. After I retired in 1992, there were multiple changes in the captaincy. Pakistan made close to 30 changes between 1992 and 2010, while in that same period Australia had only 4 different captains. I also had a problem of frequent infighting within the fundraising committees for the hospital that I had set up in various cities abroad. After a lot of research, I realized that the reason for lack of leadership in Pakistan is partly because of our school system. Almost all of our test cricketers and political workers are state school educated, but sadly the public education system has deteriorated dramatically in the past 40 years. Most schools just do not groom students in the art of leadership, failing to teach them how to handle responsibility. It was different at Atchison, where there was a system of prefects, head boys and team captains. On top of that, we had military training so that we were taught about teamwork and the qualities a leader needed to command respect. Unfortunately, the vast majority of our private schools and almost all the government schools have neither any sports facilities nor any extracurricular activities. Students therefore do not have the opportunity to learn that authority brings with it responsibility, and abusing that position loses one the respect of one's subordinates. Despite my struggle to find the right people to work with and the sheer drudgery of the endless traveling, my crisscrossing of the country was highly educational and at times inspiring. This was especially so when I met people who, with no resources but lots of passion, were doing everything they could for Pakistan. I found the biggest hurdle in my way was cynicism. People had been led up the garden path so many times that they were skeptical about everyone. How could they be sure I was not like the previous politician offering change? The period of about 4 years after our failed election bid was one of great learning. Meeting so many people was an education in itself. I learned to judge people more effectively and gradually began to be able to make up my mind very quickly about the mindset of those I was dealing with. Sharif had corrupted politics so much that most people were looking to make money out of it. I found dealing with such types the worst aspect of politics. I learned to get to the point quickly. This ability to distinguish between the important and the trivial allowed me to manage my time better. Also, after dealing with our devastating electoral loss, and the subsequent stream of crises within the party, I had a good understanding of my team and knew which members I could depend on. I had discovered in cricket that you only know the real worth of your players when they are put under pressure. As I had predicted, Sharif was not to last long. Between his economic mismanagement and growing disregard for the institutions of a modern state, antagonism towards him mounted. In September 1999, virtually the entire opposition formed the Grand Democratic Alliance, GDA, on a one-point agenda to campaign for his removal. That year he had railroaded the 15th Amendment, which would have given him dictatorial powers as the Amir-ul-Mu'minin, or leader of the faithful, through parliament with his brute majority. He was already behaving like a Mughal emperor after pushing through the 13th Amendment, which made the presidency important, and the 14th Amendment, which made the parliament a rubber-stamping body and meant that no member of his party could disobey the chairman or they would lose their seat. After the 15th Amendment there would have been no check to his already unprecedented powers. We feared that once the Senate election took place in March 2000, Sharif would then command a majority there too, enabling him to make the 15th Amendment law. Sharif and his party had already done something that remains one of the most disgraceful events in our country's history. Senior members of his party, along with party workers, physically attacked the Supreme Court of Pakistan in 1997, and the Chief Justice, who had dared to start contempt proceedings against Sharif, had to flee from the court. The Grand Democratic Alliance held rallies in all the major cities. It was clear that public opinion had turned against Sharif. Though the ordinary people of Pakistan were not concerned about the 15th Amendment, they were being crushed by growing unemployment and a faltering economy on one side and constant price rises, especially utility bills, on the other. Further weakening Sharif's position was growing tension with the army chief, General Musharraf, after the ill-conceived and disastrous Kargil operation. In May 1999, New Delhi discovered that Pakistani soldiers and Kashmiri freedom fighters had occupied the Kargil Heights, in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Ironically, this came just 3 months after Sharif had hosted the Indian Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee on his historic peacemaking visit to Lahore, the first time, since the Indian involvement in the conflict in East Pakistan that had led to the establishment of Bangladesh, that the two heads of government had met formally and issued a declaration and a memorandum of understanding which committed both parties to peace. As a result, according to Sharif's version of events, the then commander-in-chief of the army, Musharraf, had launched the operation without consulting him. However, Musharraf insisted that the Prime Minister had been on board. Whatever the truth of the matter, Sharif found himself in a difficult situation. Pakistan was slammed by the international community and the Indians retaliated. Seeing the Pakistani position was untenable, Sharif was forced to beg Bill Clinton for help in brokering a peace deal with New Delhi. Sharif ordered the troops to withdraw, confusing a humiliated Pakistani public who had been fed the official line that only Kashmiri freedom fighters had occupied the Kargil heights and that Pakistan had no control over them. There then followed a cold war between Musharraf and Sharif. Any genuine leader would have hauled the army chief in front of him and court-martialed him for what turned out to be one of Pakistan's biggest debacles, not just in terms of lives, money and international reputation but also damage to the Kashmiri cause. Instead, Sharif dithered for months before eventually attempting to remove Musharraf in the most bizarre way. On the 12th of October 1999, the army chief was mid-air on his way home from a trip to Sri Lanka when Sharif sacked him and appointed Ziauddin Butt as his replacement. He diverted Musharraf's plane in order to buy himself more time, and a chaotic few hours ensued before army officials loyal to Musharraf rebelled and launched a full-scale military takeover. The victorious Musharraf had the Prime Minister and his cronies arrested. Military rule was back. The amazing thing was that the same GDA members who had been virtually pleading with the army to remove Sharif, there was no constitutional way of getting rid of him, were later to club together with him and form another alliance against Musharraf. Benazir's PPP began to make overtures to Sharif when she realized that the army was not going to ask her to join the government and was instead bent on pursuing corruption charges against her. When I found out, I could not believe what contempt these opportunistic politicians had for the people of Pakistan. Just a few months previously they were telling the public that Sharif was the greatest threat to democracy in the country, and now they had to ally with him, in order to save Pakistan's democracy. Benazir and Sharif had been trying to expose each other's corruption to the public for 11 years. Indeed, the Sharif government had spent a fortune in taxpayers' money trying to get Benazir convicted of graft and had put Zardari in jail, yet when they realized that Musharraf was intent on charging them both, they clung to each other. That sums up Pakistan's politics from 1988 to 1999. No wonder that according to a Gallup survey, 80% of the population supported the military takeover. As for Sharif, he was later tried and convicted on charges of hijacking and terrorism. He took a plea bargain to avoid life imprisonment and was exiled to Saudi Arabia in 2000. While I welcomed what seemed like an end to the Benazir-Sharif merry-go-round, I was also thankful for Musharraf's coup for personal reasons. Since our marriage, Jemima had been doing her best to get involved in life in Pakistan. Not only had she converted to Islam and adapted to Pakistani culture, but she had learned to speak Urdu quite well. In the elections she had campaigned for me, giving speeches in Urdu. She had also helped me with the hospital fundraising. We could sell our fundraising dinners much better if she was guaranteed to be there. She also started a clothing business, having clothes embroidered in Pakistan and selling them in the West. All the profits went to the hospital and her business gave employment to hundreds of women. I was particularly proud of her when she decided to help Afghan refugees in Jalozai camp living in subhuman conditions. She had read an article about how some children had died of cold at the camp, home to thousands of refugees since the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Being a mother herself, this affected her deeply, and so she launched a charity and raised millions of rupees for tents, provisions and medical clinics for the refugees. However, just as we were working to make our cross-cultural marriage succeed, external forces were attempting to sabotage our family life. We discovered how truly vicious the political mafia in Pakistan could be. In December 1998, just to embarrass me politically, an antique smuggling accusation was slapped on Jemima by Sharif's government. It alleged that tiles Jemima had sent to her mother as a Christmas present were antique, despite the fact that they were bought from a shop that never even claimed they were of historical interest. Pakistan's laws are very strict about the exporting of antiques. After the case was registered, Jemima had one of the tiles examined by 3 museums in England and had a thermoluminescence test done to date it. All confirmed the tiles were modern. So keen was the government to implicate Jemima in the case, though, that it did not even follow the Customs Department's own laws. A 9-member committee comprising members of the Archaeological Department, the Customs Department and the person accused have to deliberate before an object is declared an antique. Instead, one government employee in the Archaeological Department declared them to be antique. The case should have immediately been thrown out of court but was pending for months, and the judge kept giving the government time to improve its case. Since smuggling is a non-bailable offense in Pakistan and potentially carried a sentence of up to 7 years in jail, I decided that Jemima should stay in England until the case was over. This again meant a disruption to our family life. Neither of us could take a risk with a government-controlled judiciary, especially with a 2-year-old and another baby on the way. After the military coup, the case against Jemima was immediately thrown out, but she had been forced to stay out of the country for 11 months in total. Sadly, even after this major respite, politics was to cause further disruption to our family life. If the 1997 elections had been hard on our marriage, the 2002 polls were even tougher. At least in 1997 Jemima had been able to participate in my campaign, this time she had to stay out. Instead of being able to be the asset she should have been, my political opponents had turned her into a liability. Because they couldn't hurl the usual accusations of sleaze at me, they attacked me through her. It was especially hard for her not to be actively involved because she is basically a very political person. This was a great blow for our marriage. A cross-cultural marriage can work if your passions and objectives are the same, but Jemima had to be sidelined. And even then she was not spared. Spurious stories about her continued to emerge in the Pakistani press. A comment about having read a book by Salman Rushdie for her university dissertation on post-colonial literature turned into a story saying she had chosen him as her guide. There were demonstrations calling for her citizenship to be revoked. Hard for anyone, this kind of treatment was particularly distressing for somebody like Jemima, who was naturally shy and sensitive. Compounding our difficulties, during the campaign I was away touring the country for about 5 months. I was campaigning almost single-handedly, my best candidate having withdrawn. I barely saw my wife and children. In the end, the party won 1 seat, my own in Miyawali, which given the lack of freedom the elections were conducted under, with the whole state machinery helping my opponent, was a great achievement. It came at a heavy personal cost. When I returned home to Islamabad I found Jemima demoralized and for the first time realized that she was losing the battle and giving up. I had already started to harbor guilt about her being so unhappy. She had tried incredibly hard, but my political career and the constant attacks on her were very difficult. I felt guilty because as the older partner I was more responsible for our marriage. She was so young when we married, and when we made the decision to launch my party, how could she have known what such a life would entail in a foreign land? But I should have thought about all the possible consequences. For the first time I began to think that maybe I had been irresponsible. Just because I was battle-hardened after years of struggle did not mean that my wife should have been thrown at such a tender age into the turbulent world of Pakistani politics. Adapting to a completely alien culture was already challenge enough. Personal attacks on people's families, especially their wives, are rare in Pakistani culture. It had never occurred to me that people could stoop so low as to attack a young foreign woman because of her husband's political work. So when Jemima said she wanted to return to England to study for a 1-year master's degree in modern trends in Islam at London's School of Oriental and African Studies and take the boys with her, as devastating as the news was, I didn't resist. As always, I believed that somehow circumstances might change. I hoped that if the political climate improved I could lure her back, or that she would come to realize that the life we had created together in Pakistan was worth staying for. But in my heart I knew it was the beginning of the end. Above all, a marriage cannot work with 2 people living on different continents. Within a year I could see that she was absorbed by her life back in London with her family and friends and was happy there. The 6 months leading up to our divorce and the 6 months after made up the hardest year of my life. The children's obvious distress exacerbated the misery. They are always the ones who suffer the most in divorce. Suleiman, being older, felt it more, and seeing his pain doubled my pain. I missed them terribly. Nothing filled the void. I loved fatherhood more than anything I had ever experienced in life. Having had children after my cricket career, I had been at home to watch every phase of their growing up and was a hands-on parent, an experience so many fathers miss out on because of their work. My life had been work and family. I hardly ever saw my friends or went to dinner parties. Now not having them around was the hardest thing to come to terms with. For the first time I began to understand how people could lose the will to live. Usually someone who wakes up every morning with optimism and joy at facing a new day, I suddenly found it hard to get out of bed. Once again, faith got me through these difficult times. Once I had come to terms with the divorce, I picked myself up and threw myself back into pursuing my political and humanitarian work. The optimist in me cannot help but see the brighter side of a situation, and I felt that in many ways I was luckier than most in my divorce. There was no acrimony, none of the bitterness caused when one partner has been unfaithful to the other, no financial disputes and no lawyers involved. Jemima is very generous in giving me time with the boys. They come to stay with me during their school holidays and I then devote myself entirely to them. Whenever I'm in England, I stay with my ex-mother-in-law, Lady Annabel, who still treats me as part of the family. Her sons Ben and Zach are like younger brothers to me. The rest of the time I am free to focus on my work. Moreover, the burden of Jemima's unhappiness was lifted from me, and if there's one thing worse than seeing a loved one leave, it's seeing a loved one unhappy. As the Quran says, after every hardship there is ease, Quran 65, 7 and 742, and I consoled myself with the Quranic verse that sometimes Allah doesn't answer our prayers because He knows what's best for us. It is hard to say that with hindsight I would have done things differently anyway. My married friends always envied me my life when I was a bachelor, but the greatest happiness and contentment in my life came from my marriage. I always was a risk taker, so I was willing to take the lows with the highs. Whenever I looked back and thought about what else I could have done, I felt that, given the circumstances, I had worked harder at making my marriage work than at anything else in my life. So there were no regrets. If anything could have prevented me from marrying Jemima, it was the realization that she was maybe too young and inexperienced to be presented with such a challenge. It pained me that she had to endure all the suffering that divorce entails. She gained 2 beautiful sons, though, and a second home in Pakistan, where she was much loved. She is still very attached to the country and always the first to rally round when disaster befalls us, be it floods or earthquakes. People often ask me why I didn't go to London to save our relationship, but it was never an option. I could never imagine living in London, just making a living out of cricket journalism. For me that would have been a purposeless existence. I cannot even imagine life without a passion and a purpose. Once I had cricket, now I have my political struggle, which was to become all the more urgent after the turmoil in Pakistan unleashed by the 9/11 attacks. And Jemima knew that. She did not marry a lounge lizard. My drive was one of the things that had attracted her to me. I think I would have been diminished in her eyes if I had lost that drive.